In the years that followed the Second World War, the world found itself at a crossroads. Two atomic bombs had ended one conflict, but they had also birthed another. A conflict fought not only with armies, but with secrets, shadows, and the constant fear of annihilation. This was the Cold War, a time when nations looked to the skies, both in wonder and in terror. It was within this tense, uncertain atmosphere that whispers began. Whispers of objects streaking across the heavens faster than any jet, performing maneuvers beyond the reach of known physics. Whispers of something not of this earth. And with those whispers came the seeds of what many believe to be the greatest cover-up in American history. Majestic 12. For some, it is a name that means nothing. For others, it is the holy grail of UFO conspiracies, a top-secret committee hand-picked by the President of the United States, tasked with controlling, concealing, and perhaps even weaponizing the knowledge of extraterrestrial life. But before we can unravel that shadowy legend, we must understand the world into which it was born. The 1940s were an age of discovery and an age of dread. The atom had been split, Hiroshima and Nagasaki reduced to ash, and humanity suddenly found itself wielding the power of gods. Yet, at the very same moment, humanity was also looking to the stars with new urgency. If we could master the atom, what else might exist out there, watching us, waiting for us, perhaps even visiting us? It is no coincidence that the modern UFO phenomenon erupted at precisely this time. In June of 1947, a man named Kenneth Arnold took off in his small plane from Chehalis, Washington. He was simply looking for a downed military aircraft. What he saw instead would spark an entire movement. 9 silvery objects darting between mountain peaks near Mount Rainier, moving like stones skipping across water. Arnold would describe them as traveling at speeds exceeding 1,000 miles per hour, impossible by the standards of the day. When reporters asked him to explain what they looked like, Arnold compared their motion to that of saucers skipping across a pond. The phrase stuck. From that day forward, the world would speak of flying saucers. Only weeks later, in the desert of New Mexico, the story took a darker turn. A rancher near the small town of Roswell discovered strange debris scattered across his land. Metallic fragments, lightweight but unbreakable. Beams marked with symbols that looked unlike any writing he had ever seen. The local air base collected the wreckage. At first, the military admitted it was the remains of a flying disc. Newspapers across the nation rammed the headline. But within 24 hours, the story changed. Officials claimed it had been nothing more than a weather balloon. For many, the contradiction was proof of deception. For others, it was the birth of modern conspiracy theory. But for those who believe in Majestic 12, the Roswell crash was not just a bizarre event. It was the very reason the secret committee was formed. A recovered craft, possibly even recovered bodies, demanded secrecy at the highest level. And secrecy in Washington meant control. As the Cold War deepened, secrecy became the coin of the realm. Nuclear projects, spy planes, intelligence operations, all hidden from the public eye, all wrapped in classification. Against this backdrop, it was all too easy to imagine the government would also hide evidence of extraterrestrial contact. After all, if the knowledge of the atomic bomb had been guarded so closely, why not the greatest discovery in human history? Thus, the stage was set. A world on edge, primed by fear, secrecy, and mistrust. A government already adept at hiding its most dangerous truths. A public eager for answers, yet willing to believe the impossible. Out of this swirling mixture of paranoia and wonder, the legend of Majestic 12 would emerge. But legends do not simply appear. They are built, layer by events both real and imagined. by documents leaked, testimonies whispered, and by a culture that demands stories when answers are withheld. In the chapters to come, we will peel back those layers. We will trace the origin of the Majestic 12 documents, investigate the men said to be part of the group, and follow the trail of disinformation, forgery, and obsession that has stretched across decades. Majestic 12 may be a fabrication. It may be the truth. Or it may be something far more complex. A story planted to conceal other stories, a secret within a secret. But whatever the case, to understand Majestic 12 is to understand the very nature of secrecy itself. And that story begins here, in the uncertain years after the Second World War, when the world looked upward and asked a single, haunting question: are we alone?
The story of Majestic 12 cannot be separated from the story of secrecy itself. To understand why people believe a group like MJ12 could exist, one must look at the track record of governments, and the United States government in particular, when it comes to protecting information it deems dangerous. In the 1940s, projects like the Manhattan Project had already shown that secrets on a massive scale could be kept from the public eye. Hundreds of thousands of workers, scientists, and military personnel were involved in the creation of the atomic bomb, and yet the true nature of their work remained hidden until the day Hiroshima burned. If a secret of such catastrophic importance could be maintained for years, why not the secret of alien life? The Cold War magnified this instinct. Every piece of technology, every intelligence breakthrough, every strategic edge was locked behind layers of classification. Spy planes like the U-2, reconnaissance satellites, radar advances, missile programs, all were shrouded in secrecy. Entire towns were built around weapons development, their residents sworn to silence. Against this backdrop, the idea of a hidden committee of 12 men operating outside of public accountability feels less like fantasy and more like a natural extension of the times. And yet, the true fuel behind Majestic 12 was not secrecy alone. It was the phenomenon of UFOs themselves. After Kenneth Arnold's sighting and the Roswell incident, reports began to flood in from every corner of America. Pilots saw discs streaking past their cockpits. Farmers found scorched circles burned into their fields. Ordinary citizens described lights that danced and darted in ways no aircraft could. The media, eager for stories that stirred both fascination and fear, amplified each report. Flying saucers became part of the national vocabulary. The U.S. government responded, as governments often do, with investigations. Project Sign was launched in 1948, followed by Project Grudge in 1949, and eventually Project Blue Book in the 1950s. These were official inquiries into UFO sightings, some of which ended with dismissive explanations: balloons, weather phenomena, misidentified aircraft. But others remained stubbornly unexplained. To the public, these projects signaled that the government was at least taking the phenomenon seriously. To conspiracy theorists, however, they were proof that something was being hidden. After all, why investigate unless there was something to investigate? This is the crucible in which Majestic 12 was forged, a time when the skies themselves seemed alive with mystery, when secrecy was the norm, and when the average citizen increasingly suspected that the truth was being withheld. It is also important to remember the psychological climate of the age. America in the late 1940s and early 1950s was not merely living under the shadow of the Cold War, It was living under the shadow of annihilation. Nuclear weapons were no longer theoretical. They were real, and they were devastating. Every citizen knew, consciously or not, that the push of a button in Moscow or Washington could bring about the end of civilization. When people looked up and saw strange lights moving against the night sky, they did not simply see mysteries, they saw threats. Could these be Soviet weapons? Could they be American weapons tested in secret? Or could they be something else entirely? Something beyond the imagination of generals and politicians alike? Roswell, in particular, burned its way into the cultural consciousness. Even after the official weather balloon explanation was issued, the story refused to die. Too many witnesses remembered the debris as something otherworldly. Too many whispers suggested bodies had been recovered, small humanoid beings unlike anything seen before. While skeptics dismissed these accounts as exaggerations or outright fabrications, believers saw them as proof of a cover-up. And if there was a cover-up, there had to be people in charge of it. Not just random officers at Roswell Air Base, not just low-level intelligence agents, something higher, something more organized, something majestic. The seeds were sown, though few at the time could have guessed how far the legend would grow. In the years to come, the name Majestic 12 would surface in documents, in whispers, in supposed leaks from the highest levels of power. But here, in the first decade after World War II, it was nothing more than an unspoken possibility, a shadow behind the curtain, hinted at, but not yet revealed. Yet history teaches us that shadows can shape reality just as much as the events themselves. The shadow of secrecy, the shadow of fear, the shadow of possibility. It is within these shadows that Majestic 12 would come to life.
If Roswell lit the spark, then the years that followed were the kindling. The skies above America seemed restless. Radar operators reported blips that appeared, vanished, then reappeared miles away in seconds. Pilots chased lights that danced just out of reach, only to see them vanish as though swallowed by the stars. One event, in particular, would cement the sense that something extraordinary was happening. In July of 1952, the skies above the nation's capital became a theater for the unknown. For several nights, radar operators at Washington National Airport and Andrews Air Force Base tracked objects moving at impossible speeds over the city. Pilots were scrambled to intercept. Bright lights were seen darting over the White House and the Capitol itself. Newspapers exploded with the story. "Saucers swarm over Capitol," screamed the headlines. The government downplayed the incident, of course. Officials suggested temperature inversions had caused false radar readings. Skeptics accepted the explanation. Believers did not. To them, the Washington flap, as it came to be called, was proof that the phenomenon was real, undeniable, and perhaps unstoppable. If objects could buzz the very heart of American power without consequence, then certainly someone, somewhere, was tasked with understanding and concealing the truth. This is where the idea of a secret committee begins to feel inevitable. After all, secrecy thrives on plausibility. For many, the only logical explanation was that a group of powerful men were already on the case, working behind closed doors, crafting explanations for the public while sifting through the extraordinary behind the scenes. And this was not without precedent. During this same era, the Central Intelligence Agency was born. Covert operations multiplied. Entire programs existed for decades without the knowledge of Congress or the public.
from psychological warfare projects like MK Ultra to the development of reconnaissance aircraft like the U-2 and SR-71. History is filled with examples of clandestine endeavors hidden behind the impenetrable wall of classified. So when whispers of Majestic 12 began to surface decades later, the ground had already been prepared. People were ready to believe because the pattern of secrecy had already been proven. But in the early 1950s, there was no Majestic 12, at least not yet in name. What there was instead was an atmosphere, a mood, a growing conviction that the government knew more than it was telling. A conviction that deepened every time a sighting was brushed aside, every time a witness was silenced, and every time a story changed from one day to the next. Consider the pilots. These were not wild-eyed dreamers or attention seekers. These were trained men, disciplined, their reputations dependent on accuracy. And yet again and again, they reported seeing craft that outpaced and outmaneuvered anything in the known arsenal. To dismiss such men was to invite doubt. If they could not be trusted, who could? And consider the scientists. Even within the official investigations, there were disagreements. Some researchers within Project Sign, the first serious military study of UFOs, concluded that extraterrestrial origins were not only possible, but likely. Their conclusions were buried, replaced with reports that dismissed the phenomenon. Was this caution, or was it censorship? Was it prudence, or pressure from above? Such questions never faded. They lingered, festering in the minds of a public already inclined to distrust authority. And with each passing year, the foundation for the Majestic 12 legend grew stronger, even if no one yet spoke the name aloud. By the mid-1950s, UFOs were no longer isolated curiosities. They were cultural phenomena. Hollywood embraced them, filling movie screens with tales of visitors from the stars. Comic books, pulp magazines, and radio dramas spread the idea further. Science fiction and reported reality began to blur. For many, the idea that we were being watched was not science fiction at all. It was science fact, hidden beneath layers of denial. In this crucible of secrecy, sightings, and suspicion, a space was carved out in the imagination of the American people. A space waiting to be filled with names, documents, and stories. A space that, decades later, would be filled by the legend of Majestic 12. But before that moment arrived, the world itself would change. Humanity would break free of Earth's atmosphere. Satellites would circle the planet. Man would ride rockets into the heavens. The race for space was on, and with it came new opportunities for discovery, for secrecy, and for the intertwining of both. And so as the 1950s gave way to the 1960s, the stage was no longer merely national. It was global. The skies were no longer the limit. They were the new frontier. A frontier in which the question, "Are we alone?" took on a new urgency. And in that urgency, the seeds of Majestic 12 continued to germinate, unseen, waiting for the right moment to burst into the light.
By the end of the 1950s, America stood at the threshold of a new era. The space race was accelerating. Sputnik had circled the globe, beeping its eerie message into radios everywhere. Soon, American astronauts would climb into capsules and ride fire into orbit. For the first time in history, humanity was not merely looking up at the stars, it was reaching for them. And yet, for all the triumph of these achievements, a shadow persisted. Reports of unidentified flying objects did not fade with the dawn of the space age. They multiplied. Pilots continued to see impossible craft. Civilians continued to report dazzling lights. Military radar continued to track anomalies that could not be dismissed as balloons, weather, or swamp gas. It was as if the closer we came to the heavens, the more the heavens pressed back against us. For many in the public, a pattern had emerged. Official investigations like Project Blue Book existed, but their conclusions were often anticlimactic. For every report of something extraordinary, there was an explanation, often mundane, sometimes insulting to the intelligence of the witnesses. Yet behind those explanations, people sensed another truth, that the government was not so much explaining as it was managing, not investigating, but containing. It was containment that fueled suspicion, containment of information, containment of possibility. And in that containment, people began to imagine the architecture of secrecy itself. If information this profound was being hidden, who was hiding it? If knowledge of contact, of crashed disks, of recovered beings was locked away, who held the key? This is the question that would give birth to Majestic 12. Not yet in documents, not yet in names, but in the cultural consciousness. A sense that somewhere, beyond the reach of public scrutiny, a handful of powerful men were pulling the strings. Men trusted with knowledge too great, too dangerous to share. Men operating under a mandate that no one had voted for, in rooms no one could enter. And when, decades later, the first so-called Majestic 12 documents would leak into the hands of researchers, this groundwork ensured that people would believe, because belief had been prepared patiently for years. The secrecy of the atomic bomb had shown that immense truths could be hidden. The Cold War had taught citizens that governments lie, and often. The flood of UFO sightings had created an expectation that something more was at play than weather balloons. Roswell had left a wound of distrust, a scar that never healed. And the space race had shifted the horizon of possibility itself. Majestic 12 did not arrive in a vacuum. It arrived in a world that was ready for it. The stage was set, the curtain was drawn, and soon the first act of the Majestic 12 story, the act of revelation, would begin. But before we can explore the documents, the leaks, and the storm of controversy that would erupt in the decades to come, we must turn our attention to the origins, to the men whose names would be etched into those papers, to the profiles of generals, scientists, and statesmen whose alleged membership would give the group its aura of authority. For if Majestic 12 existed, it did not exist in the abstract. It existed in the flesh and blood of those men, and their lives, their careers, and their reputations must be examined before we can weigh the possibility of their secret role in history. And so our journey moves from the stage of culture and secrecy to the stage of personalities and power, from the atmosphere of mystery to the individuals at its core. The legend of Majestic 12 is about to take shape.
For decades, the whispers persisted. Strange lights in the sky, crashed disks in the desert, silent cover-ups. But whispers are not proof. Whispers are wind. What transformed those whispers into something tangible were documents. Papers that appeared not in the heat of 1947, but much later, surfacing in the 1980s as if slipped from the shadows of history into the hands of investigators determined to chase the truth. Among these documents was a memorandum dated July 1947, allegedly signed by President Harry Truman. The memo referred to a group called Majestic 12, described as a secret committee tasked with overseeing the recovery and study of extraterrestrial craft. To believers, this was the smoking gun. To skeptics, it was the beginning of one of the most elaborate hoaxes in modern history. But the name stuck: Majestic 12, or simply MJ12. Why 12? The number itself carries authority, small enough to suggest intimacy, large enough to suggest diversity of expertise. And in the documents, 12 names were listed. Names not of unknown figures, but of men whose reputations were real, verifiable, and formidable. General Hoyt Vandenberg, former Chief of Staff of the Air Force; Admiral Roscoe H. Hillenkoetter, the first Director of Central Intelligence; Dr. Vannevar Bush, the brilliant scientific administrator who had overseen the Manhattan Project; and others. Generals, scientists, intelligence officers, each one lending credibility to the story. Here were not the names of cranks or dreamers, but of architects of power, men who had already shaped history in profound ways. And if such men were named in connection with UFO secrecy, then surely there must be truth in the claim. At least that is how many saw it. The documents painted a picture of a government shaken by the events at Roswell. A crashed craft, perhaps even recovered bodies, had forced the Truman administration to act. And so a secret committee was formed, its mandate to conceal, to study, and to control. To ensure that knowledge of extraterrestrial life did not reach the public unfiltered. To manage not just information, but the very narrative of reality itself. To some, the idea was horrifying. To others, it was reassuring. After all, if humanity had encountered visitors from beyond, wouldn't it make sense to place that knowledge in the hands of the most capable men available? Scientists to study it, generals to protect it, intelligence chiefs to guard it, presidents to sanction it. The alleged Truman memo was followed by another bombshell, the so-called Eisenhower briefing document, dated 1952. This paper, if authentic, was even more sensational. It described the recovery of extraterrestrial technology, outlined the role of Majestic 12 in managing the secret, and presented itself as a briefing prepared for the incoming president, Dwight I. Eisenhower. To imagine such a document is to imagine the weight of history compressed into a few pages. The idea that a president of the United States, on assuming office, would be quietly told of mankind's contact with another world, and then instructed to tell no one. These documents did not emerge from official archives. They appeared mysteriously, sent anonymously to researchers and journalists. Their origin was shadowy, their authenticity hotly debated. But the timing of their appearance ensured that they would become the centerpiece of modern UFO lore. The legend of Majestic 12 was no longer an unspoken possibility. It was written, typed, stamped, and signed. At least it appeared to be. And once names were attached, 12 men of flesh and blood, verifiable in the annals of history, the story gained a new gravity. No longer could skeptics dismiss it as fantasy. They could call it forgery, yes. They could argue about fonts, typewriters, and signatures.
but they could not argue that the men listed were real, or that they were exactly the type of men who would be chosen for such a secret if it existed. That is the paradox of Majestic 12. The documents may be false, but the idea they present feels, to many, undeniably true. In the chapters that follow, we will meet these 12 men. We will examine their lives, their careers, their reputations. We will ask whether they might have been chosen for such a role, and what their inclusion tells us about the world of secrecy in which Majestic 12 was born. For if we are to understand the legend, we must first understand its cast.
If Majestic 12 was real, it was not a faceless entity. It was not an abstraction. It was 12 men, flesh and blood, bound by power, secrecy, and history. And their names read like a roster of the American elite, drawn from the very heart of science, the military, and intelligence. Let us begin with General Hoyt S. Vandenberg. Vandenberg was no ordinary officer. He had risen swiftly through the ranks of the United States Army Air Forces during World War II, becoming a trusted strategist and leader. By 1947, he was appointed as the Chief of Staff of the newly independent United States Air Force, overseeing its transformation into a pillar of Cold War power. If there was ever a man who might have been entrusted with the nation's most extraordinary secret, Vandenberg was a likely candidate. His name carried weight. His authority extended across the skies. And in truth, his involvement in UFO matters was not merely speculation. Historical records show that Vandenberg received briefings on unidentified flying objects as early as 1948, during the early days of Project Sign. Some accounts even suggest he was unsettled by what he heard, demanding evidence but never finding satisfaction in the explanations provided. Was he one of the chosen 12? If the documents are real, then yes. His role as guardian of the skies made him indispensable. If the documents are false, then his inclusion was a masterstroke of plausibility, for no one could argue that such a man in such a position would not be on the front lines of secrecy. Next, Admiral Roscoe H. Hillenkotter. Hillenkotter was the first director of Central Intelligence, a man whose very role was to manage secrets. Appointed in 1947, the same year as Roswell, he sat at the heart of America's intelligence apparatus during its formative years. His task was to coordinate information across agencies, to sift signal from noise, to safeguard the nation against threats both foreign and unknown. Decades later, Hillenkotter would lend his name to a statement supporting greater transparency on UFOs, even joining the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, a civilian research group. To believers, this is no coincidence. It is evidence of a lifelong involvement, a glimpse of a man who knew far more than he could say. To skeptics, it is an oddity, nothing more. But ask yourself, if knowledge of a recovered craft had been deemed too destabilizing to reveal, who better than the Director of Central Intelligence to manage that knowledge? Hillenkotter's inclusion in the MJ-12 list makes too much sense to be ignored. Then there was Dr. Vannevar Bush, a scientist, yes, but more than that, a scientific administrator of unrivaled reputation. During World War II, Bush had led the Office of Scientific Research and Development, overseeing the Manhattan Project. It was under his guidance that the bomb had been built, a feat of coordination and secrecy as much as science. To imagine Bush at the helm of extraterrestrial research is to imagine a continuation of his role. If humanity had recovered alien technology, who better to marshal the nation's brightest minds in its study?
Who better to manage the delicate balance of secrecy and discovery? Bush's name in the MJ-12 documents electrified believers, for here was a man who already embodied the template, the hidden genius, the quiet administrator of impossible science, the one who took humanity across a threshold it could not fully comprehend. If he had guided us through the nuclear age, could he not also have guided us through the extraterrestrial age? 3 names, 3 pillars of authority. And there were 9 more. Generals like Nathan F. Twining, who would become chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, James V. Forrestal, the nation's first Secretary of Defense. Each name carried significance, each biography lending weight to the claim. This was no random collection. This was a carefully curated list, crafted to suggest inevitability. If Majestic 12 existed, these were precisely the men who would have been chosen. But therein lies the dilemma, because such plausibility cuts both ways. It makes the story convincing, but it also makes forgery easier. Anyone wishing to fabricate such documents would naturally choose names that fit so perfectly, that aligned so seamlessly with expectation. Were these men truly members of a secret group, or were they the stage props in an elaborate performance? That question lingers still.
We have met some of the first names on the list, men of power, science, and secrecy. Yet the Majestic 12 roster did not end there. It expanded to include others, leaders who formed a web of influence stretching across the armed forces, the intelligence community, and the corridors of Washington. One such figure was General Nathan F. Twining. Twining's career was steeped in aviation. As a commander in World War II, he had overseen massive air operations in the Pacific. Later, he rose to become Chief of Staff of the Air Force and eventually Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest military position in the nation. It was Twining who, in September 1947, penned a now famous memo about unidentified flying objects. In it, he concluded that the phenomena reported were something real and not visionary or fictitious. Those words alone have echoed through decades of UFO research. To many, they are proof that Twining knew far more than he revealed publicly. Whether he was part of Majestic 12 or not, his perspective mattered, and his documented stance on UFOs makes his alleged membership all the more credible. Then came James V. Forrestal. And most importantly, they transformed Majestic 12 from abstract speculation into a story with narrative weight. Whether one believes them or not, the documents represent a key turning point. They are the bridge between Cold War paranoia, UFO sightings, and the modern mythology of extraterrestrial secrecy. They are the moment when whispers became words, rumors became text, and the idea of Majestic 12 became a force in popular consciousness. And from this point, the story only grows more intricate, more shadowed, and more controversial. For behind the papers lay questions that remain unanswered. Who truly wrote them? Why now? And if the committee existed, what happened to it after the 1950s? The answers, if they exist, are buried in shadows, hidden in bureaucracy, and perhaps forever beyond our reach. The appearance of the Majestic 12 documents was more than a revelation. It was a spark thrown into a powder keg. For the UFO community, it was electrifying. Researchers and enthusiasts pored over every word, scrutinizing line breaks, signatures, and internal references. Every nuance mattered. Every anomaly became a clue. Believers treated the documents as proof of a sweeping government cover-up, connecting decades of unexplained events.
They saw in them a narrative that finally made sense of Roswell, the Washington, D.C. radar flaps, and countless other sightings. Suddenly, a larger story emerged. The United States had encountered something extraordinary, and a small group of men, the 12, had been entrusted to manage it. Skeptics, however, viewed the papers with suspicion, and their skepticism was rigorous. Linguists examined grammar and syntax. Historians cross-checked military titles and organizational structures. Typists and document experts analyzed fonts and typewriters. Across decades, the criticisms mounted: formatting anachronisms, inconsistent signatures, improbable letterheads. Some claimed the documents were deliberate hoaxes designed to exploit a collective yearning for answers. But for many, the imperfections were precisely what made the documents compelling. They were messy, contradictory, fragmentary, like secrets themselves. Secrets are rarely clean. They're buried, misfiled, partially destroyed, whispered about. To believers, the errors only confirmed authenticity, the work of humans attempting to shield knowledge from the world, faltering in small but telling ways. The fallout from the leaks was immediate. UFO conferences became battlegrounds. Books were published, articles circulated, and the debate intensified. Researchers like Stanton Friedman, one of the most prominent ufologists of the era, defended the document's authenticity, citing the plausibility of names, events, and timing. Others, equally diligent, called them fraudulent, arguing that no evidence existed beyond the papers themselves. The controversy extended beyond the UFO community. Government agencies, when asked to comment, consistently denied the document's legitimacy. FBI reports described some as bogus. Yet, paradoxically, the denials seemed only to fuel curiosity. Official dismissal is often interpreted as proof of truth in conspiracy culture. If the government says it's false, perhaps it is false only in public. It was in this atmosphere that Majestic 12 began to evolve from a document-based mystery into a full-fledged legend. The name entered the lexicon of UFO research, referenced in books, magazines, and later television programs. It became shorthand for hidden knowledge, the ultimate symbol of government secrecy, and the possibility that humanity was not alone. In the years that followed, the documents inspired further investigation. Researchers sought corroborating evidence in archives, interviewed former military personnel, and attempted to trace every connection implied by the memos. Some pointed to inconsistencies in timelines, questioning how certain generals could have served on the committee while holding other posts. Others highlighted the precision of the alleged mission objectives, claiming such detail could not have been manufactured without intimate knowledge of classified procedures. And so, Majestic 12 became a paradox. It was simultaneously fragile and indestructible. Easily dismissed, yet compelling. Likely fictional, yet irresistibly plausible. Its power lay not in certainty, but in possibility. The very questions it raised, the potential for hidden knowledge, the existence of a secret committee managing extraterrestrial contact, were enough to sustain decades of debate. The legend, once sparked, refused to die. It adapted, evolved, and expanded. UFO enthusiasts theorized about cover-ups reaching into the 1960s and beyond. Some connected MJ-12 to Area 51, believing the committee orchestrated research on recovered alien technology. Others linked it to Project Blue Book, suggesting that official investigations were fronts for deeper, more clandestine work. Through it all, the men on the original list became almost mythic figures. Their biographies were scrutinized, their actions analyzed, their public lives reinterpreted through the lens of the secret committee. In this way, Majestic 12 became more than a document. It became a lens through which the history of the early Cold War could be examined, with secrecy, paranoia, and power refracted through the possibility of extraterrestrial contact. And for every believer, there remained the haunting question: if the documents were authentic, what became of Majestic 12? Did the committee dissolve quietly? Was it absorbed into other clandestine operations? Or does it still exist, quietly managing what the world is not yet ready to know? The questions remain unanswered, but the legend endures, and with it, the fascination that has persisted for decades.
Majestic 12 did more than spark controversy in the UFO research community. It seeped into the public imagination, shaping perceptions of government secrecy, extraterrestrial life, and the very limits of human knowledge. By the mid-1980s, the idea of MJ-12 had spread far beyond the few researchers who had received the initial documents. Books, magazines, and television specials chronicled the alleged committee, analyzing names, memos, and timelines. The narrative was compelling. 12 men entrusted with humanity's most profound secret, working quietly in the shadows to manage extraterrestrial contact. This notion resonated because it fit a broader cultural pattern. By the 1980s, the American public had grown accustomed to the idea that governments hide things from their citizens. Watergate had left its mark. The Iran-Contra scandal was brewing in whispers. People knew that bureaucracies were capable of deception on an epic scale. In this environment, the concept of a secret committee overseeing alien technology was not far-fetched. It felt plausible. Television shows and documentaries began referencing MJ-12 as part of UFO lore. Researchers and journalists debated its authenticity, often citing new discoveries in archived government documents. Even skeptics acknowledged that the idea captured something essential about the human relationship with secrecy and authority. Majestic 12 became shorthand for hidden knowledge, the ultimate what-if of government transparency. The cultural impact was profound. Majestic 12 influenced UFO conventions, inspiring lectures, debates, and reenactments. It became a touchstone for enthusiasts, a symbol of the larger mysteries that seemed to hover just beyond the reach of ordinary observation. It was a story of power, secrecy, and possibility, a story that could be traced from Roswell to the Pentagon and beyond. But it also shaped perception in more subtle ways. Names on the MJ-12 list became mythic archetypes, representing the intersection of authority, intellect, and secrecy. Generals, scientists, and intelligence officers became characters in an ongoing narrative, their lives scrutinized for evidence of hidden agendas. The very human drama of careers, decisions, and ambitions was reframed through the lens of extraterrestrial intrigue. And for every believer, the documents and the legend they inspired posed a persistent question. If such knowledge existed, what was the cost of secrecy? The story of Forrestal's tragic death, the careful placement of officials, the alleged protocols for handling alien technology, all suggested a system in which truth came at a price. It was a cautionary tale, a reflection on power, and a meditation on human curiosity. The influence of Majestic 12 also extended into fiction.
Books, movies, and television often drew inspiration from the alleged committee, incorporating the idea of secret government groups managing extraterrestrial phenomena. Science fiction narratives borrowed the structure, small teams of powerful men and women overseeing alien technology, containing knowledge that could destabilize society. In this way, MJ-12 moved from alleged fact into cultural myth, shaping the way society imagines contact with the unknown. And yet the legend retains a tension that continues to fuel debate. Are the documents authentic? Were the men truly members of a secret committee? Or is MJ-12 an elaborate fabrication designed to exploit the public's fascination with UFOs and government secrecy? The answers remain elusive. But the legacy of Majestic 12 is undeniable. It has provided a framework for UFO research, a narrative through which sightings and reports can be interpreted. It has challenged skeptics and believers alike to consider the limits of what we know, what we can know, and what might remain forever hidden. By shaping both investigation and imagination, MJ-12 transformed from a series of mysterious documents into a lasting cultural phenomenon. It is a story that continues to echo across decades, influencing research, media, and public perception alike. And with that, the stage is set for the next chapter. The deeper mysteries that arose from Majestic 12, the sightings, the recoveries, and the ongoing search for proof that the legend might be more than myth.
The story begins where many believe it should. Roswell, July 8, 1947. The crash near Corona, New Mexico, ignited the mythos of UFO secrecy. Initial reports described a flying disc recovered from the desert. Eyewitnesses claimed debris scattered across the sand, strange materials unlike any earthly alloy, and even, according to some accounts, small humanoid bodies. The official narrative, issued just days later, was a weather balloon, a mundane explanation for something extraordinary. But for researchers and enthusiasts, the contrast between witness accounts and official statements only fueled speculation. It suggested not incompetence, but concealment, a calculated decision to hide the truth from the public. Enter Majestic 12. According to the documents, the committee was activated to manage exactly this scenario: recover the craft, study its technology, examine biological evidence, and protect the secrecy of the operation. Every decision, every action was allegedly overseen by the 12 men. The MJ-12 documents suggest that this was not an isolated incident. Other recoveries allegedly occurred in subsequent years, although details are sparse, cloaked in the layers of secrecy the committee demanded. The consistent theme was advanced technology, propulsion systems beyond conventional science, alloys resistant to known methods of analysis, and materials that defied categorization. One of the most compelling claims involves a series of craft supposedly recovered and studied at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Researchers report accounts of engineers and scientists working in highly restricted areas, examining objects that could not be explained by contemporary physics. These stories are anecdotal, unverifiable in the mainstream, yet they persist in interviews, memoirs, and third-party accounts. Biological evidence, too, is often cited. Small humanoid beings, described as fragile and with disproportionately large heads and eyes, are alleged to have been found at certain crash sites.
While no physical proof has ever been publicly produced, the consistency of these descriptions across decades and witnesses has kept the discussion alive. The alleged recoveries fueled another layer of intrigue: reverse engineering. If the technology recovered was genuine, some argue, it could explain leaps in aerospace engineering, stealth technology, and materials science. Critics dismiss this as conjecture, citing more conventional explanations for technological progress. But the notion persists. If extraterrestrial craft existed, and if MJ-12 had access to them, the committee could have quietly guided decades of research while the public remained oblivious. A master influence. Majestic 12 also allegedly influenced protocol. According to the documents, every sighting, recovery, and report had to be filtered through the committee. Information was compartmentalized. Witnesses were debriefed under strict non-disclosure. Military personnel were instructed to misidentify objects if questioned. Science, bureaucracy, and secrecy intersected in a carefully orchestrated pattern if the documents are to be believed. Even today, the legacy of MJ-12's supposed operations echoes. Area 51 in Nevada, often associated with alien technology research, is frequently linked to the committee. The secrecy surrounding its airspace, the classified projects within its perimeter, and the intense security protocols all fuel speculation that some knowledge is still tightly controlled. And so the legend continues. Majestic 12 as a shadow organization, managing recoveries, controlling information, and influencing the boundaries of technological progress. Whether real or mythical, the narrative endures because it touches on something elemental: humanity's fascination with the unknown, the thrill of secrecy, and the possibility that we are not alone. From Roswell, July 8, 1947, to the modern era, the shadow of Majestic 12 lingers. Its influence is invisible, yet pervasive, shaping both fact and myth in ways that remain difficult to untangle.
Beyond Roswell, the story of Majestic 12 unfolds across scattered reports, mysterious crash sites, and eyewitness testimonies. While much remains unverified, the narratives share striking consistencies: craft retrieved under secrecy, materials unknown to conventional science, and the occasional appearance of biological entities that defy explanation. One recurring location in these accounts is Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. Known officially as a hub for research and aircraft testing, it is, in UFO lore, the site where recovered extraterrestrial craft were stored and studied. Engineers and scientists were allegedly given access only under strict clearance, and the technology they examined supposedly included propulsion systems capable of rapid acceleration, sudden stops, and maneuvers that defied the limits of known physics. Witnesses describe small disks, metallic in appearance, yet lighter than expected, their surfaces sometimes inscribed with markings or symbols that remain undeciphered. Some accounts even mention instruments that appeared to interface with the craft in ways that suggested advanced computational systems, predating modern electronics. To skeptics, these claims are improbable, anecdotal, and unverifiable. To believers, they hint at a technology far beyond our own, silently shaping decades of research. Then there are the biological accounts. Witnesses, often former military personnel or scientists, have described small humanoid beings found at crash sites. These beings, sometimes called greys in UFO lore, were reportedly fragile, with large heads, dark eyes, and minimal musculature. Allegedly, these bodies were preserved and studied under extreme secrecy, providing insights into physiology unlike anything previously documented. The MJ-12 documents, if authentic, offer a chillingly bureaucratic approach to these recoveries. Protocols were outlined for site security, witness management, and controlled dissemination of information. Every object, every sample, and every observation had to be catalogued meticulously, while outward appearances to the public remained mundane: weather balloons, military tests, or simple misidentifications. Reverse engineering is another recurring theme. Some researchers argue that recovered alien craft may have influenced technological advances in aerodynamics, stealth capabilities, and materials science. Although evidence remains speculative, the idea persists that the United States may have quietly incorporated insights gleaned from extraterrestrial technology into classified research programs, guided by MJ-12 oversight. Witnesses also recall intense compartmentalization. Few individuals ever saw the whole picture. Even those involved in study and analysis were typically aware only of specific tasks. Information traveled upward, filtered through layers of command, ensuring that no one, outside the committee or sometimes even within it, had full knowledge. This approach, if true, would explain why decades of declassified files reveal little more than isolated reports and fragmentary evidence. Beyond the United States, there are stories of international encounters. Some researchers suggest that Majestic 12 coordinated with allied governments on recovered technology, or monitored sightings that occurred overseas. The logic follows: if extraterrestrial phenomena are global, containment strategies might require multinational oversight, at least informally. These claims remain anecdotal, but serve to expand the perceived scope of MJ-12's influence. And then there are the leaked photographs and schematics. Some images, widely circulated in UFO literature, show what appear to be disks or fragments of unknown origin. Skeptics argue these are hoaxes, misidentified aircraft, or artistic renderings. Believers counter that the sheer consistency across decades of reports cannot be dismissed, and that MJ-12's veil of secrecy is precisely why proof remains hidden from the public eye. Ultimately, the alleged recoveries, witness testimonies, and technological mysteries serve to reinforce the central theme of Majestic 12. A hidden hand, orchestrating, observing, and managing knowledge that humanity may not be ready to comprehend. Whether real or fabricated, these accounts have embedded themselves into the cultural imagination, sustaining fascination and debate for decades. The shadow of Majestic 12 stretches from the desert of New Mexico to classified military labs across decades of research, rumor, and speculation. And as each story emerges, as each witness account is told, the legend deepens, blurring the line between history and myth, between secrecy and revelation.
The legend of Majestic 12 would be incomplete without the stories of those who claimed to have witnessed the inner workings of the alleged committee, or to have seen evidence firsthand. Whistleblowers and researchers emerged over the decades, each adding fragments to the ever-expanding narrative. One of the earliest was Jaime Shandera, a private investigator and ufologist, who in 1984 received the first purported MJ-12 documents. Shandera, along with colleague Stanton Friedman, helped publicize the documents, bringing them to the attention of the wider UFO research community. Their involvement sparked both fascination and skepticism, forcing the legend into public debate. Other whistleblowers emerged in the 1980s and 1990s. Some claimed to have worked at military bases such as Wright-Patterson Air Force Base or Holloman Air Force Base, witnessing classified projects and unusual materials. Many described unusual debris, symbols or markings on craft fragments, and protocols that strictly prohibited any disclosure. Even minor infractions reportedly led to intimidation, reassignment, or threats of prosecution under security regulations. One account from a former Air Force technician described being briefed on a recovered disc in the early 1950s. He recalled metallic components unlike anything he had seen, instruments that defied conventional physics, and a chilling sense that information was being deliberately withheld from the public. To him, and to countless others, Majestic 12 provided the framework to explain why such secrecy existed. Investigations into the authenticity of the MJ-12 documents intensified. Researchers scoured archives for corroboration, consulted historians, and analyzed typewritten memos. Skeptics highlighted inconsistencies. Certain fonts did not exist in the 1940s, signatures were questioned, and dates or military titles occasionally conflicted with known historical records. Government agencies, when approached, consistently denied the validity of the documents, labeling them bogus or unauthentic. Yet controversy only fueled fascination. Every denial, every critique seemed to reinforce the narrative in the minds of believers. If the government was dismissing the documents, perhaps it was only because the truth was too dangerous or sensitive to acknowledge. The very act of secrecy became proof of secrecy. Some alleged whistleblowers added dramatic claims. One suggested that the committee oversaw the transportation of alien craft across the United States, relocating them to secure locations far from civilian observation. Another claimed to have witnessed recreation simulations of alien biology, meticulously documented in classified files. These accounts, unverifiable and fragmentary, nonetheless added layers of intrigue and complexity. Even in the 21st century, whistleblowers continue to surface. Former military personnel, scientists, and intelligence officials occasionally speak, often under conditions of anonymity. Their testimonies reinforce the idea that MJ-12, or a committee like it, might have managed recovered materials and sightings while keeping the public in the dark. While none provide definitive proof, the consistency of some details across decades adds weight to the speculation. The controversies surrounding MJ-12 extend beyond the documents themselves. Researchers debate motivations, authenticity, and the plausibility of such an operation. Could 12 men, even at the highest levels of government, truly manage extraterrestrial contact without leaving a trace? Could decades of secrecy be maintained in a democracy with a free press, thousands of witnesses, and the pressures of bureaucracy? The answers remain elusive, but the legend persists because the questions resonate. Majestic 12 has become a lens through which we examine secrecy, trust, and the unknown. Whether it existed or not, the very debate exposes human fascination with hidden knowledge, authority, and the possibility that we are not alone in the universe. The combination of alleged whistleblowers, leaked documents, and persistent investigation creates a complex tapestry, one in which reality, speculation, and myth are difficult to separate. For every skeptic, there is a believer. For every denial, a new account emerges. And through it all, Majestic 12 casts its long shadow.
As the 20th century gave way to the 21st, Majestic 12 transformed. No longer confined to obscure UFO research circles, the legend seeped into mainstream consciousness, influencing media, entertainment, and public imagination. Books, documentaries, television programs, and films repeatedly referenced MJ-12, often as shorthand for government secrecy and extraterrestrial oversight. The allure of MJ-12 lies in its duality. It is at once compelling and frustratingly elusive. The alleged documents, the names, the protocols, all provide structure for the story, yet nothing is conclusively verified. This ambiguity fuels the fascination, allowing believers and skeptics alike to project fears, hopes, and questions onto the legend. Television series dramatized the concept, depicting shadowy committees, clandestine recoveries, and advanced technology hidden from the public eye. Science fiction often drew inspiration from MJ-12, imagining secret government agencies studying alien craft, shaping the narratives of shows, novels, and movies. In this way, the alleged committee became a cultural archetype, the ultimate representation of hidden knowledge and controlled revelation. Yet the impact was not limited to entertainment. MJ-12 influenced modern UFO disclosure movements. Calls for government transparency, public access to declassified files, and congressional hearings on unidentified aerial phenomena are all framed in the shadow of a committee that may or may not have existed. References to MJ-12 appear in discussions of Area 51, experimental aircraft, and recent Pentagon reports on UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, suggesting a continuity of secrecy that extends from the 1940s to today. Modern researchers continue to probe the legend. Archival searches, interviews with retired military personnel, and forensic analysis of documents attempt to separate fact from fabrication. Each discovery, each contradiction keeps the conversation alive, ensuring that the legend remains relevant in both scholarly and popular discussions. Pop culture has also embraced the mystique. Video games, novels, and podcasts explore MJ-12 as a symbol of hidden truth, often blurring the line between reality and fiction. The idea resonates because it taps into fundamental human curiosity, the desire to know what lies beyond perception, and the instinctive suspicion that authorities may withhold profound knowledge. The enduring questions remain simple yet profound. Did Majestic 12 exist? Were the recovered craft and alleged technologies real? Are the documents authentic or elaborate fabrications? And if the committee did exist, what is its status today? These questions continue to inspire debate, research, and speculation. They also illustrate why Majestic 12 has endured.
It is more than a historical claim. It is a lens through which humanity explores secrecy, authority, and the possibility of life beyond our planet. The committee, whether real or mythic, challenges us to consider the limits of our knowledge, the ethics of secrecy, and the tantalizing idea that some truths may lie just beyond reach. From the deserts of New Mexico to the classified corridors of government installations, from whispered testimony to cinematic reimaginations, Majestic 12 has become a symbol of mystery itself. It exists as an idea, a narrative, and a cautionary tale, a reminder that sometimes the most compelling stories are those where certainty remains forever out of reach. And so, the shadow of Majestic 12 stretches into the present, shaping curiosity, inspiring investigation, and haunting the imagination. Its influence is subtle, yet profound.
Majestic 12 is more than a story about alleged documents, shadowy committees, or recovered craft. Its power lies in what it reveals about humanity, our fascination with the unknown, our desire for secrecy, and the limits of belief. The psychological impact of the legend is subtle yet profound. For believers, MJ12 represents the ultimate hidden truth, that governments may know far more than they reveal, that extraterrestrial life may be real, and that some knowledge is deemed too dangerous for public consumption. This belief challenges assumptions about reality, authority, and human understanding. It sparks curiosity, inspires investigation, and drives countless individuals to seek evidence, analyze documents, and trace the paths of those 12 men across decades. For skeptics, MJ12 is a cautionary tale in critical thinking. It illustrates how compelling narratives can be constructed from fragments, names, and carefully designed documents. It demonstrates the ease with which myth can masquerade as history, and how the human mind is predisposed to see patterns even where none exist. The legend reminds us that doubt is as necessary as belief, and that inquiry must always balance imagination with evidence. Philosophically, Majestic 12 raises profound questions. What is the cost of secrecy? How far should knowledge be withheld, even for security reasons? If humanity were confronted with undeniable evidence of extraterrestrial life, how would society react? MJ12 forces these questions into the open, even if the committee itself remains shrouded in shadows. Culturally, the influence is unmistakable. From Roswell, July 8, 1947, to modern UFO disclosures, the story of MJ12 has shaped public perception of government secrecy, influenced countless works of fiction, and fueled debate about our place in the cosmos. The legend serves as both mirror and lens, reflecting societal anxieties while providing a framework through which the unknown can be explored. And in the end, perhaps the most enduring element is ambiguity. The documents may be genuine, or they may be elaborate fabrications. The men named may have served on a secret committee, or they may have been cast into legend for dramatic effect. The recovered craft and biological evidence may exist, or they may exist only in rumor and imagination. Yet this ambiguity is precisely what sustains Majestic 12. It is a story that cannot be fully resolved. Its power lies in its persistence, in the way it draws people into questions of knowledge, secrecy, and possibility.
Whether real or imagined, Majestic 12 remains a testament to human imagination, secrecy, and the enduring allure of the unknown. Its shadow stretches across decades, across generations, and perhaps even across the stars.
From the earliest whispers of unidentified flying objects to the secret corridors of power, the story of Majestic 12 is a tale of secrecy, speculation, and enduring fascination. It begins in the shadows of post-war America, with a government seeking to understand the unknown, and a small cadre of men, real or imagined, tasked with guarding the nation from truths that might have been too profound for public knowledge. We explored the formation of the committee, the 12 men whose names would become synonymous with secrecy and authority. Generals, scientists, and intelligence officials, all united under the cloak of classification, entrusted with decisions that may have changed the course of history. We examined the documents, the memos, and the leaked files that brought Majestic 12 from rumor to legend. These papers, whether authentic or expertly forged, shaped decades of research, debate, and imagination. They created a framework for inquiry, a skeleton upon which the public and ufologists could build a story of extraterrestrial contact, recovery operations, and technological wonder. We traced the impact of Majestic 12 on both culture and consciousness. From Roswell, July 8, 1947, to Pentagon reports in the 21st century, the legend has inspired books, films, television, and relentless curiosity. It has fueled debates between skeptics and believers, guided the work of whistleblowers, and embedded itself deeply into the human fascination with secrecy, authority, and the unknown. Through alleged recoveries, witness testimonies, and tales of advanced technology, Majestic 12 has become more than a historical claim. It is a lens through which we explore our relationship with knowledge and the limits of perception. The committee, real or mythic, challenges us to confront questions that are at once thrilling and unsettling. What do we not know? Who controls what we may never learn? And if the unknown is ever revealed, are we ready to accept it? Ultimately, Majestic 12 endures not because the documents are proven or the recoveries verified, but because it taps into something elemental within humanity: the longing to understand, the thrill of secrecy, and the persistent hope that we are not alone in the universe. Its shadow stretches across time, culture, and imagination, a reminder that some mysteries remain deliberately hidden, while others survive because they are impossible to fully forget. As we close this account, consider this: the true power of Majestic 12 is not in what it may have done, but in what it represents. It is the intersection of truth and speculation, secrecy and curiosity, history and myth. And in that space between certainty and wonder, the legend of Majestic 12 continues to live, quietly, profoundly, and eternally. The shadow remains, the questions remain, and the mystery endures.
If you enjoyed today's video, we thank you very much. Please like and subscribe to Rare Breed Chronicles. And let's dive into another story that defies the ordinary.